6:58 a.m., Delmont International Airport. The dog smelled it before anyone else did. A black Labrador named Duke stopped cold in the middle of the security line, planted his front paws, and stared at an old man's briefcase like it had done something wrong. His handler tugged the leash. Duke didn't move.
Alert, checkpoint B, positive alert on a locked case.
Alert, the handler said into her radio. Checkpoint B, positive alert on a locked case. The old man standing over that case did not look surprised. He did not look guilty either. He looked at his watch, then at the clock mounted above the X-ray belt, and his lips moved without sound, like a man praying or counting. He was doing both.
9 hours. I need 9 hours.
9 hours. I need 9 hours. His hand was shaking. Not from fear of the dog, not from fear of the uniforms now closing in around him. It was shaking because a thin steel luggage cable ran from the briefcase handle to a loop welded onto his own wristwatch band, and he had not let that case out of arm's reach in 6 years. Sleeping, showering, driving, 6 years, chained to himself, because there was no second copy of what was inside it, and if it disappeared, so did the only thing left that could save his son. Sir. A TSA supervisor stepped in front of him, hand already resting near her belt. Her name tag read D. Pharaoh.
Sir, I need you to place the case on the belt.
I can't do that.
The old man said. His voice was low, rough, the voice of a man who had learned, the hard way, how to sound calm when nothing inside him was calm at all.
Sir, that's not a request.
It's cabled to my wrist. If you cut it, you damage what's inside. And what's inside can't be replaced.
He said it slowly, like a man reciting the only sentence he trusted himself to get right.
Please, I am begging you. Just let me explain, and then do whatever you need to do. But 9 hours from now, a filing window closes. And if I miss it, it doesn't reopen. Ever.
Pharaoh didn't understand a word of that, and she didn't need to. To her, in that moment, standing in front of a stranger's locked box wired to his own body, at 6:58 in the morning, it sounded like exactly what her training manual called it. Reyes, she said to the junior officer beside her.
Now.
Secondary. Now. He didn't carry himself like a man in trouble. He carried himself like a man used to being obeyed, which was almost worse, because it read as arrogance to people who had no idea who he'd been. 2 officers took his arms. He didn't resist. That, more than anything, unsettled the younger one. Tony Reyes, 29, 4 years on the job, still knew enough to notice things his supervisor had stopped noticing. He's not fighting, Reyes said quietly to Pharaoh as they walked the old man toward secondary screening. Look at his hands. He's not clenching. He's just scared. Not guilty scared. Different scared. Everybody's scared when they get caught, Reyes. Caught doing what, though? Pharaoh didn't answer, because she didn't know either, and that gap, the space between he did something wrong and we don't actually know what, was about to become the most dangerous 3 feet of empty air at Delmont International Airport. Quick pause before we continue. Where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments. And if you're enjoying the story, hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Tomorrow's episode is one you don't want to miss. The secondary screening room smelled like disinfectant and cold coffee. 1 table, 3 chairs, a camera blinking red in the corner. The old man sat with his wrist still cabled to the briefcase, because nobody had yet worked up the nerve to cut it. I need you to tell me what's in the case, Pharaoh said, taking the seat across from him. Documents, he said. A sealed evidence sample. A legal filing with a courier tracking number. That's all. No weapon. No device. You can X-ray it 100 times, and you'll see the same thing every time. Paper and a small sealed vial. Then why is it locked to your wrist? He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face changed. Not fear now, something closer to exhaustion. The kind that comes after holding a weight so long, your arms stop feeling it as weight and start feeling it as part of your body. Because I spent 6 years getting what's inside that case, he said, and there is exactly one copy. If it's lost, damaged, contaminated, or delayed past 10 o'clock tonight, a boy dies who shouldn't. Pharaoh's pen stopped moving. A boy, she repeated. A man now. But he was a boy when it happened. His jaw tightened. That's my son's life in that folder. The room went quiet. A bomb technician named Curtis had already run a portable scanner over the case twice. No explosive signature, nothing but the shape of paper and one small cylindrical object consistent with a sealed sample vial. He caught Pharaoh's eye and gave a small shake of his head. "There's nothing dangerous in there, Denise," Curtis said quietly. "I'd stake my cert on it." "That doesn't tell me why he's chained to it," Pharaoh said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. "I chained it to myself," the old man said, "because 6 years ago I broke into a property evidence room after hours, using a key I was never authorized to keep, and pulled a fiber sample the department had logged as destroyed. If anyone ever traces that sample and it isn't in a documented, unbroken chain of custody from that night to a courthouse filing window today, it becomes worthless. Not just to my case. To me, personally, criminally worthless. I've been carrying evidence of my own crime for 6 years to try to undo somebody else's. "I need to see what's in the folder," Pharaoh said. He held out his free hand, palm up, steady now in a way it hadn't been at the checkpoint. "Cut the cable, carefully, and whatever you do, do not break the seal on the vial. That seal is the only thing standing between my son and a lethal injection at 10 o'clock tonight." Curtis cut the cable, slow and careful. The briefcase came free. Pharaoh set it on the table and opened it herself, gloved, methodical. Inside, a manila folder, thick with paper, edges soft from handling. A courier envelope, already addressed, stamp affixed. Destination, a law office downtown. And nestled in gray foam padding, a small glass vial sealed in evidence tape, a chain of custody label taped to its side in handwriting that had clearly been rewritten and reapplied more than once over the years. Pharaoh lifted the folder's cover page and read the header out loud. State v's Dean Bragg. She looked up. "Bragg, same as me," he said. "He's my son. My name is Walter Bragg." Reyes stepped out to radio a status update and came back 10 minutes later, pulling Pharaoh aside near the door. "I ran his name," Reyes said quietly. "He's a former Delmont PD officer. Retired 9 years ago after a car accident. That's all that came back on the general check. The deeper personnel file needs a supervisor login." Pharaoh glanced back at Walter, who sat with his hands folded, watching them without pretending not to. "That doesn't explain the folder," she said. "No, but it's more than a random guy with a story." She walked back to the table and sat down. "Mr. Bragg, just Walter. Walter, I have a locked case, a man who admits to a felony to obtain what's inside it, and a story about a filing deadline I have no way to verify in the next few minutes. I have a job to do." "I understand your job," Walter said, something sharp coming into his voice now. Not anger at her, an old, familiar frustration with the machine itself. "More than you know. If I'd pulled someone like me aside years ago, I'd have done exactly what you're doing. Then help me understand why I shouldn't keep doing it." He reached into his jacket slowly, showing his hand the whole way, and pulled out a folded email, time-stamped 5:52 a.m. "Walter, filing window confirmed. Emergency stay motion must be received by clerk's office no later than 4 p.m. today. Hard deadline, no extensions. Judge has already left instructions with her clerk." If the sample isn't in evidence custody and the motion isn't filed by then, we lose our shot before the execution tonight. Please, for God's sake, don't be late. MC Farrow read it twice. 9 hours from 6:58. That's the number you kept saying at the checkpoint. That's the number. It was 9 hours then. It's a little less now. I still can't just release you, Farrow said, but the certainty had gone out of her voice. I have to verify this. I have to call it in. Then call it in. Please, fast. Farrow stepped out to make the call. The attorney, the case number, the story, all of it needing confirmation before anyone made a decision that couldn't be undone. What she didn't know yet was that a call had already been made about Walter Bragg that morning. Not by her, not by anyone at the airport. At 5:40 a.m., 18 minutes before Monica Cade's email reached Walter's inbox, a call had gone out from a private office downtown to Delmont International's security operations desk. 2 minutes, 40 seconds long, no name given. Just a description, a flight number, and 4 words buried in a call log nobody thought to check, until much later that day. Flag him. Hold him long. 22 years ago, the house on Delmore Street still smelled like Sunday cooking most mornings. Dean Bragg was 17, all elbows and half-formed height, the kind of kid who forgot his jacket every October and borrowed his father's instead. The night it happened, Dean had walked to the corner store 3 blocks away for milk his mother needed for breakfast the next day. He'd passed a man in a dark hoodie on the sidewalk without a second thought. Delmont was that kind of neighborhood, quiet, unremarkable, until it wasn't. 20 minutes later, sirens. Walter got the call at the precinct at 11:40 p.m. A convenience store clerk shot during a robbery 3 blocks from his own house. He didn't think of Dean at all, not once, not for a second, until 1:15 a.m., when 2 uniformed officers he'd trained himself walked into his own living room and asked to speak to his son. Nora had been standing in the kitchen doorway in her robe, hand pressed flat against her chest, watching 2 men she'd waved to at church put handcuffs on her 17-year-old boy for something he didn't do. He was just getting milk, she said, to no one, to everyone. He was just getting milk. The eyewitness, a woman 2 doors down, 61 years old, glasses she admitted under oath she hadn't been wearing that night, identified Dean from a photo lineup that a defense investigator would later prove had been administered improperly. The public defender assigned to Dean carried a caseload of over 90 active files that year. She met Dean twice before trial, for a combined 11 minutes. The jury took 3 hours and 40 minutes to convict a 17-year-old tried as an adult. Walter sat in the 3rd row of that courtroom in his dress uniform, because he still believed then, God help him, he still believed, that if he sat there in uniform, someone would remember he was one of the good ones, and it would matter. It didn't matter. Nothing he was mattered in that room. Only what Dean was accused of being. 2 years later, the sentence came down. Death. Walter remembered the sound Nora made when the judge said it. Not a scream. Something smaller and worse. The sound of a person's chest folding in on itself. For the next 18 years, Nora Bragg wrote to Dean every single week, without missing one. She kept his childhood bedroom exactly as it was. Same bedspread, same scuffed baseball glove on the shelf. Long after Walter quietly suggested, once, gently, that maybe it was time to pack it up. She never spoke to him about that suggestion again. 9 years into Dean's sentence, going through old evidence logs on an unrelated case, Walter found a line item that stopped his heart. A fiber sample recovered from the original crime scene, inconsistent with anything Dean owned, logged as destroyed in a records purge, but examined, off the books, 18 months after the trial, by someone with after-hours evidence room access. No report filed, no explanation. He never told Nora what he found that night. He couldn't yet. He didn't have anything real, only a hole where the truth should have been. 6 years ago, unable to shake the feeling that this thread was the only one left worth pulling, Walter broke into the evidence room himself and pulled the sample before it could vanish for good. He had no way to test it yet. No lab in the state could run what he needed, so he sealed it, hid it, and waited, telling no one, not even Nora, because he refused to hand her hope he wasn't sure he could keep. 3 years ago, a new forensic technique finally became available that could test what he'd been carrying. He spent every spare hour and every spare dollar of his pension after that, quietly, alone, building the case Nora had asked him to build, though he never told her that either, still not willing to promise what he couldn't yet deliver. 2 years ago, in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and dying flowers, Nora's heart finally gave out the way the doctors had warned it would for a decade. Walter held her hand through the last hour. She was mostly asleep, mostly gone, when she surfaced one last time, gripped his fingers with whatever strength she had left, and said the only thing she had left to say, "Don't stop until they say his name right." She didn't mean Dean Bragg, inmate number 44192. She meant Dean Bragg, her son, their son. The boy who forgot his jacket every October. Walter made her a promise in that room, still not certain, even then, that he would ever be able to keep it. He kept building the case anyway, alone, for 2 more years. This morning, 6 years after he first broke into that evidence room, was the morning it was finally ready. At 7:40 a.m., while Walter sat in a windowless room 40 feet from the checkpoint where his morning had unraveled, a very different arrival was happening at the main terminal. Governor Vivian Marsh stepped off a state plane to a small welcoming committee and a security detail that moved through the terminal like a wave clearing a path in front of her. And then the mayor's office wants 5 minutes before the ribbon cutting, and Channel 9 is... her aide was saying. "Hold on," Marsh said, stopping mid-stride. Through a side corridor, glimpsed for only a second through a propped-open door, she'd seen something snag in her memory like a hook catching cloth. An old man, being escorted by 2 TSA officers. Hands not cuffed, but clearly not free either. Walking with a limp she somehow recognized before she recognized the face. "Find out who that man is," Marsh said. "Now." The aide came back 4 minutes later, out of breath. "His name's Walter Bragg. Retired Delmont PD. There's some kind of situation. A court filing deadline. His son's on death row." "Bragg," Marsh said quietly, and 25 years fell away in an instant. She had been 26 years old the last time she'd said that name out loud with this much weight behind it. A young public defender, watching a police department close ranks around a convenient story that would have sent her younger brother Ray to prison for a robbery he hadn't committed. A robbery 3 detectives on that case had wanted closed fast, with whatever body was nearest at hand. Every detective on that case had been willing to look the other way. Every detective except one. Walter Bragg had walked into his lieutenant's office and refused to sign off on evidence he believed was manufactured. He'd been sidelined, passed over for a promotion he'd earned, quietly punished for 2 years for the crime of being the only honest man in the room, and Ray Marsh had walked free. Vivian Marsh had never forgotten it. "Cancel the ribbon cutting," Marsh said. "Ma'am, we can't just cancel it. I need to see Walter Bragg, right now." Farrow was still frowning at a flagged notation in the airport security log. "Attorney General Russell Kane's office, 5:40 a.m. Flag him, hold him long," when the door opened without a knock. Governor Vivian Marsh walked in. Walter looked up. Recognition moved slowly across his face. "Ray Marsh's sister," he said. "Vivian. Detective Bragg." Her voice had something raw in it she wasn't hiding. "You look older. So do you, Governor. It suits you better than it suits me. Pharaoh looked between them. You two know each other? 25 years ago, Marsh said. This man was the only person in the Delmont Police Department willing to tell the truth about my brother's case. When telling that truth cost him a promotion, he never asked for anything in return. She turned to Pharaoh. Walk me through exactly what's happening here. All of it. Pharaoh laid it out. The checkpoint alert, the briefcase, the confirmed filing deadline, the confirmed attorney, and finally, the flagged security log tracing back to the Attorney General's private office. Marsh's expression didn't change much on the outside. Inside, something cold and clear settled into place. Russell Kane, she said. Why would the sitting Attorney General personally order you flagged and delayed? Walter's voice dropped, the way it used to drop in interrogation rooms, right before a suspect finally told him the truth. 22 years ago, Russell Kane was my lieutenant. He oversaw the initial investigation into the case that convicted my son. He explained the fiber sample, the off-the-books examination, the nephew, Tyler Kane, 19 at the time, a struggling kid with a drug problem his uncle had spent years quietly covering for, a partial match to a fiber sold at only 2 stores in the state, one of which Tyler's mother, Kane's own sister, had a documented account with. Tyler had died in a car accident 6 years after the trial, taking, Kane believed, the truth with him. He spent 22 years believing this died with his nephew, Walter said. This morning, when my attorney filed for lab authorization, it required notifying the original prosecutor's office as a formality. He found out it hadn't died at all. Marsh's jaw tightened. She pulled out her phone. I'm calling him. Governor. Not to warn him, she said. To see exactly what he does next. The call connected on the second ring. Kane's voice came through, smooth, controlled. A career politician's default setting. Vivian, I thought you were at Delmont for the transit event. Something more interesting came up. I'm sitting with Walter Bragg. A pause. Not long. Kane had built a career on never letting a pause run long. I'm not familiar with that name, Kane said. That's strange, because your office called Delmont Airport Security at 5:40 this morning and asked them to flag him and hold him long. I'd love to know why. Vivian, I'd advise you not to speculate about internal security coordination you don't have full context on. Give me the context then. There isn't any context I owe you over speakerphone, Kane said, and something in his voice sharpened, the smoothness pulling back to show the steel underneath. But since you've clearly already decided what story you're telling yourself, let me offer you a piece of actual fact, Governor, since you seem to be missing it. Whatever Mr. Bragg is carrying in that briefcase, he obtained through a documented felony, breaking into a secured evidence facility, removing material without authorization. That's not evidence, Vivian. That's stolen property. And no court in this state is going to reopen a 22-year-old capital case on the word of a man who committed a crime to get it. The room went very still. Walter's stomach dropped, because Kane wasn't wrong. Not about the law. He was precisely right about the law. And he knew it. And he'd known it for 22 years. Which was exactly why he'd never worried about that fiber sample surfacing until this morning. That's a chain of custody argument, Marsh said slowly, watching Kane pivot in real time from denial to something far more dangerous. A lawyer's argument, built and waiting. It's the only argument that matters, Kane said. I'm not confirming or denying anything about a security flag this morning, because frankly, Vivian, it's irrelevant. Even if every word Walter's telling you is true, that sample is inadmissible. You can hand it to the best lab in the country and it won't matter, because it was never legally in his possession to hand to anyone. I'd suggest Mr. Bragg spend his 9 hours calling a criminal defense attorney for himself, because that's the only kind of lawyer his afternoon actually requires. The line went dead. Walter sat very still, the full weight of what Kane had just done settling over him like cold water. He'd expected denial. He'd expected panic. What he'd gotten instead was a man 22 years practiced at protecting himself, reaching immediately for the one weapon Walter had handed him 6 years ago, the moment he'd broken into that evidence room. "He's right," Walter said quietly. "Legally, he's right. I've known it every day for 6 years. I told myself it wouldn't matter if the science was strong enough. I think I was wrong." Monica Cade's voice came through Farrow's phone a moment later. Marsh had patched her in the instant Kane hung up, already anticipating exactly this. "I heard all of it," Monica said, her voice tight. "He's not bluffing, Walter. Illegally obtained evidence in a criminal proceeding has a suppression standard, but there are exceptions. Independent source, inevitable discovery, good faith reliance. I can argue it. I've been building the argument for 3 years in case this exact moment came. But arguing it takes time we don't have, and if the judge isn't convinced, the sample doesn't even get looked at. We're not fighting for a stay anymore. We're fighting just to get in the door." "How much time do we lose?" Marsh asked. "Hours, potentially," Monica said, "and we only have 9 to begin with." They filed at 1:40 p.m., earlier than planned, because Monica wanted every possible minute on the clerk's desk before the 4 o'clock hard cutoff. The motion included both the emergency stay request and, buried inside it, Monica's pre-built argument for admitting the sample despite how it was obtained. The judge's clerk called back at 2:55 p.m. The judge wanted a hearing, not a filing review, an actual hearing, in person, that afternoon, on the narrow question of whether the sample could be considered at all before anyone would even discuss testing it. "That's not a no," Monica said, gathering her files, already moving toward the courthouse steps. "But it's not fast, and it's not a guarantee." The hearing began at 4:20 p.m. Kane's office sent an assistant attorney general to argue the state's position. Professional, prepared, exactly as sharp as Kane himself would have been. The argument was simple and, on paper, strong. Evidence obtained through a documented felony by a former sworn officer, who understood better than almost anyone the legal requirements he was violating, could not now be laundered into legitimacy just because the cause was sympathetic. Walter sat in the gallery and felt, for the first time all day, something close to despair. He had spent 6 years so focused on getting the sample to a courthouse that some quiet, terrified part of him had never let himself fully picture a courtroom, simply refusing to open the door. At 5:47 p.m., the judge called a recess to review case law both sides had submitted. 50 minutes, then 90. The clock in the hallway outside the courtroom read 7:12 p.m. when Reyes, still in uniform, having driven to the courthouse on his own time, off shift, because something about that morning hadn't sat right with him, found Monica in the hallway. "I might have something," Reyes said, slightly out of breath. "After you left the airport, I kept thinking about the flag on Walter's boarding info. I pulled the original evidence room's after-hours access log for the night Walter says he went in. Turns out it's still archived in the department's old record system, and it wasn't just Walter's badge swipe that night." He held out a printed page. There's a second entry. 11 minutes before Walter's, unlogged in any official report. A supervisor override code used to bypass the normal sign-out procedure entirely. I ran it. It traces to a code issued only to lieutenant and above personnel in that unit that year. Monica stared at the page. Kane's code. Kane's code, Reyes said. Which means the night that fiber sample went missing from the official record. He was already in that room, 11 minutes before Walter. He's the one who pulled it first, looked at it, and put it back mismarked as destroyed. Walter didn't discover a clean piece of evidence 9 years later and steal it out of a functioning chain of custody. The chain was already broken. by Kane, years before Walter ever touched it. Monica's expression shifted, sharp and sudden, like a door swinging open. That changes the entire admissibility argument. If the state's own supervising officer corrupted the chain of custody first, Walter's later removal isn't the original break. It's a second act on evidence that was already compromised by the state itself. That's not the same legal question at all. Can you get that in front of the judge tonight? Reyes asked. I can try, Monica said, already moving. But it's 7:14 p.m., and we have less than 3 hours. The hearing reconvened at 7:50 p.m. Monica presented the access log, the traced override code, Reyes's sworn statement about how he'd found it. The Assistant Attorney General objected, requested time to verify authenticity, argued the log itself hadn't been properly authenticated for the hearing. The judge, a measured woman in her 60s named Judge Alvarez, studied the document for a long moment. I'm not making a final ruling on guilt or innocence tonight, she said. I'm ruling on one narrow question. Does the state's own possible corruption of this evidence, prior to Mr. Bragg's actions, create sufficient grounds to allow independent forensic testing under judicial supervision, pending full review of custody issues at a later date? 8:03 p.m. The Assistant Attorney General made one more attempt, arguing the timeline was too rushed, that due process required more than a few hours' review of a 22-year-old access log. Counselor, Judge Alvarez said, not unkindly, there is an execution scheduled for 10 o'clock tonight. Due process does not pause the clock for antherside's convenience. I need an answer, and I need it now. 8:29 p.m. Walter sat in the gallery, hands folded so tightly his knuckles had gone white, watching a woman he'd never met before that afternoon hold his son's entire future in the space between one sentence and the next. 8:47 p.m. The motion for emergency independent testing under judicial custody is granted, Judge Alvarez said. I'm also granting a temporary stay of execution pending the outcome of that testing. The state's execution order for Dean Bragg is halted, effective immediately. The courtroom didn't erupt. It wasn't that kind of room. But Walter felt something break loose in his chest that had been locked in place for 22 years. And for a moment, he couldn't tell if the sound in his own ears was relief or simply his heart finally allowed to beat at its normal speed again. Monica was already on her phone, calling the state's execution facility, confirming the stay had been received, confirming, voice shaking now, the composure of 6 years of work finally cracking at the exact moment it no longer needed to hold, that Dean Bragg would not be executed that night. It was 9:03 p.m., 57 minutes before 10 o'clock. The lab results came back 11 days later. The fiber sample was a conclusive match to a jacket registered to Tyler Kane's household account. Not a certainty of Dean's innocence on its own, but combined with the corrupted chain of custody, the improperly administered eyewitness lineup, and the inadequate original defense, more than enough for the appellate court to vacate Dean Bragg's conviction and order a full retrial, with Dean released on bond pending that process for the first time in 22 years. Russell Kane resigned from office 9 days after the hearing, before the ethics review into the access log and 2 other flagged cases from his tenure could conclude publicly. He did not run for governor. He did not run for anything again. The formal investigation into his conduct, both in the original case and in the airport call that morning, continued long after the cameras stopped caring. Denise Farrow requested, and was granted, a full review of Delmont International's security profiling protocols. Weeks later, in a televised interview, she said only, "I looked at an old man's shaking hands and decided it meant guilt when it meant love. I got that wrong once. I don't intend to get it wrong again." 3 weeks after the hearing, Walter Bragg sat across a scarred table in a visitation room, no glass between them, for the first time in 22 years, and looked at his son's face. Older now, harder in some places, softer in others, the particular exhaustion of 2 decades of hoping and not hoping written into the lines around his eyes. "Mom made me promise something," Walter said, "before she died. She said, 'Don't stop until they say your name right.'" Dean was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than Walter remembered. "Did I say it right?" Walter reached across the table and took his son's hand. No cuffs, no locked case chained between them anymore, nothing left to carry but each other. "Dean Bragg," Walter said, his voice finally breaking after 22 years of holding steady. "Your mother's son. My son. That's the only version of your name that was ever true." Somewhere in a filing cabinet at Delmont International Airport, a report sits closed, gathering the particular quiet of a case that ended better than it began. It notes a checkpoint alert at 6:58 a.m. and 2 clocks that ran side by side for the rest of that day. A 4 o'clock filing deadline met with hours to spare, and a 10 o'clock execution deadline that came down to 57 minutes. A system that very nearly let procedure outrun the truth before a father's persistence, and a young officer's willingness to keep asking one more question pulled it back from the edge. The dog that started it all, a black Labrador named Duke, still works the morning shift at Checkpoint B. He has no memory of Walter Bragg, no understanding of what his alert set in motion. He was only ever doing his job, sniffing for danger in a locked box. He never could have known the most dangerous thing in that briefcase was the truth. And the truth, it turned out, was also the only thing that could save a life. 2 more unforgettable stories are waiting for you next. If this story moved you, tap the next video and continue the journey. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on so you never miss what comes next. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?